Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast called Cult Conversations, the Influence Continuum with Dr. Steve Hassan. And I have an old colleague and friend, not that he's old, but I mean we've known each other for decades, a professor of philosophy and sociology, David Christopher Lane, who we must know each other for at least 30 years, Dave. I'm just going to read a bit of your bio. It's way too long to say everything.
Right.
I want to tell my listeners that you have so much that I want to tap and share with my listeners. We're going to do a second interview in the near future and do a part 2. But let me just tell my listeners a bit about you. You're a professor of philosophy and sociology at Mount San Antonio College. You're widely recognized for pioneering work in philosophy, consciousness studies, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. You've written numerous books, including The Making of a Spiritual Movement, The Untold Story of Paul Twitchell, and Ekankar. I'm going to mention the Radhaswami. Did I pronounce that right, Dave?
It's Radhaswami, like the Swami.
Radhaswami,
the doesn't been.
Tradition. Exposing cults when the skeptical mind meets the mystical. That's a fascinating thing for most of my listeners. The Unknowing Sage, the Virtual Reality of Consciousness. You've been doing groundbreaking research on neurobiological basis of consciousness. You're a meditator. You're a fount of knowledge. And I'll add that something I didn't know, you're a frickin' world champion of body surfing, like 8-time champion. Maybe we'll touch on that just as the consciousness experience of going with the flow. It's got to be a flow state to be good at that. And, I can just lastly tell my all my listeners, that for many years, when I'd have a case involving an Indian guru cult or something, I'd be like, "Hey, Dave, ever hear of this one?" And then I'd hear ba 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 and ba 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 and ba ba and read this, and you have this extensive library on your website, neuralsurfer.com. So with that, David Christopher Lane, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to see you, bro.
Yeah. So tell us about your journey, like consciousness and meditation and altered states. Please tell our listeners about.
I think they'll enjoy this. Okay. Yeah, imagine you're 20 years old. I'm at Cal State Northridge. I'm taking a class, which you can no longer have this name in a title of a class called Cults and Sex, right? And the teacher was Professor Hatt. And he asked us to do a term paper on a new religious movement. Mm-hmm. I picked a group called Ekankar. This is 1977. I think I'm 20 years old. Mm-hmm. And I write a term paper. It's supposed to be 12 pages. I write a term paper that's 120 pages because I'm an obsessively strange, weird research guy. And I found out that he had plagiarized. He claimed that his writings were original, and he had plagiarized from a guy named Julian P. Johnson, who published in 1939. He also died in 1939, a book called The Path of the Masters. Twitchell claimed he was married to one woman, but I found out he'd been married prior. Twitchell claimed he had gone to India, but he hadn't. So I write this term paper thinking, well, Ekankar would like to see what I found. So I sent it to him like an idiot, and they were in Menlo Park at the time, and they threatened to sue me. I think it was $2.5 million they threatened to sue me, or at least my classmate also got sued. And so that caused a stir. And then eventually what happened was I got the Spiritual Counterfeits Project. You may have heard of them.
I remember them. They were a Christian counter-cult education project.
That's right. They did a journal. SCP did a journal on Ekankar and used my term paper as the basis of that. And they distributed to they made 40,000 copies, distributed to almost every Ekankar center in the world. Caused a huge stir. Ekankar, then Darwin Gross was then the guru or the master, sent a letter out saying I was part of the negative force called Call from the beginnings of time to destroy the true teachings of Ekankar. And if you see Elaine's research, burn it on sight. And so some guy got a copy of my term paper up in Oregon, and he ran a Kinko's copy center, and he sent it throughout the United States, throughout thing. So this caused, you can imagine. So at this stage, I then graduate, and I meet a professor because of Elwood at a USC had read the paper and told me I should go up to Berkeley, and I met a guy named Professor Juergensmeyer. And because I had transferred my knowledge of baseball cards. Now, Stephen, I loved baseball when I was a kid, and I knew stats. So I switched it over to gurus, basically, and I was really good at genealogically tracking down gurus. So Juergensmeyer invited me to be his research assistant, to go to North India, to track down Shabad yoga gurus. Now, how this relates is that Twitchell was initiated by one of these Shabad yoga gurus named Kirpal Singh. Mm-hmm. So my job was to go to North India, meet all these different gurus, and compile the largest genealogical tree that ever been done on this particular movement called the Radhaswami movement. That was published in 1991 by Princeton University Press, and the genealogical tree is in the back and all that. So that's how it all started.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure I met you when that paper came out. Someone sent it to me. Hey, this ex-Mooney might be interested in it. And I was like, Ekankar, what's that? And then I got other clients and cases with, asking me about, the cult that Arianna Huffington was in.
Well, that's the offshoot. No, that's interesting you mentioned that, because back in 1977, I was doing this research. I found out this guy named John-Roger Hinkins had founded a movement of spiritual inner awareness in early 1970s. But he was a member of Ekankar, but more or less didn't deny it, but kind of tried to disassociate from it. So I wrote him a letter. He then had his secretary write me a letter, said, well, the master's very busy, but he can meet you for 15 minutes in Mandeville Canyon, which is what his mansion was. Probably burnt down now from the fires. But I went to go see him. Now, this is going to sound, you may have to edit this, but I want to tell you the story.
Go for it, baby.
Here it goes. As I come into the compound, there's about 5 young, really handsome guys washing his Lincoln car. Mm-hmm. Now, and they're in short shorts, okay, just so you can visualize this. Yep. So I should have been suspicious that John-Roger Hinkins may have been gay, but he claimed to be celibate. Right. Now, I was young back then. I was very young. And so I walked to meet him. He looked at me and he goes, I don't have 15 minutes. I have all day for you. So for 5 hours, for 5 straight hours, we talked, discussed, and he kind of supported my expose of Ekankar, primarily because he didn't want me to expose him.
Right.
But 5 years later, several members defected, and they thought I would be the right guy because I knew John
Peter
Roger.
McWilliams, or
that was later. Peter McWilliams won't defect until later on.
Okay.
So these people meet me in a secret meeting in a condominium in Santa Monica, and he said, well, you know John-Roger, and you exposed Ekankar, and you need to expose this guy. I go, well, what did he do? And he says, well, he's a terrorist. Like, if you leave the movement, he threatens to do nasty things to you.
Yeah, but he was stooping all the boys.
Well, this is the whole point. He would at night pick one of his followers, usually heterosexual. He didn't like to have sex with homosexual males.
Yeah.
And he would say, and this is a euphemism, you're watching my body tonight. And that's because John-Roger, the mystical traveler of consciousness, would leave his body. That's what he
called himself, the mystical traveler. Every 27,000 years, the mystical traveler comes to Earth, and you're blessed to be stooped by this.
Well, what happens gets better. He leaves his body at night, to fight the evil spirits on the astral plane. But occasionally a demonic spirit will take over his body and want to have sex with who's ever next to him. And if you have sex with him, then you're protecting him on the higher astral planes. And if it hurts, it's burning off your karma. I'm not making this up. Yeah. So all this came out. And so I called John-Roger because I had the secret number to his hotline. And he got really mad. He just went out of his mind. And I knew right then they were telling the truth.
Yep.
So I wrote an article called The JR Controversy. He then got really pissed off and robbed my house on October 5th of 1984. John-Roger personally, along with a guy, probably Michael Fader, came into my house in Del Mar. I was living in an apartment. I was teaching at UC San Diego at the time, and ransacked the place. But he's so stupid, he took my wife's diary. He then sent all that material to Eckankar with his handwritten notes. And a handwritten expert found out that Eckankar sent it to me and found out it was his handwriting. I then went to the P.O. box because he was sending out worldwide, you're going to like this. He was sending out a message against me by the Coalition for Civil and Civic Freedom, which is kind of a rip on SCP, claiming I was a gay FBI agent being funded to do now, I don't mind the gay part. The FBI was way too far. And so what happened was I went to the P.O. box. Guess who signed for that P.O. box? John-Roger Hinkins.
Wow.
So that's how that started. And then later, Peter McWilliams will defect and write the book, famous book called Life 102, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You.
Yes, and I have copies of it, and we were friends before he passed away. And,
great guy.
Great guy. But he has a picture in it of Ariana Huffington getting baptized. She's denied that she was in the cult. But this was a cult that had a whole, master's degree, wasn't accredited, but
right.
A master's degree in spiritual blah, blah, blah. And I helped a bunch of people who were in that cult.
Yeah, it was It was the University of Santa Monica, which is kind of a way to sound it more prestigious.
Right.
And by the way, the P.O. box I just mentioned was about maybe 2 doors down. He didn't even want to walk very far. And then you're right about Peter McWilliams. What happened to him is in 1994, he defected because he found out John-Roger, they wrote those books, Life 101, Do It.
Peter wrote the books, but John-Roger wanted first authorship.
That's right.
Because he was the spiritual master and claimed that without him, Peter would not have had the ability to write all these best-selling, New York Times best-selling books.
Well, yeah, and Peter McWilliams had HIV, and John-Roger said, if you help me put my name on these books, and I will prevent you from getting AIDS. It was a real manipulative thing. Yeah. So I was in Texas, in Austin at the time, driving back, and Peter called me, or contacted me, and then he said, I need your help. And so I helped him out and gave him all my research, and he wrote a whole chapter about the robbery. He knew a lot of stuff. It was an amazing book. But the sad story is that he was dying of AIDS.
Yeah.
And John-Roger, MSIA, paid him $2 million cash to buy the copyright back of the book, Life 102, so they could pull it off the shelves.
Yeah.
And he did. And the only website that existed that had Life 102 was me. And so they sued me.
Mm-hmm. So is the book available? Because
No.
I have copies.
Well, no, you can get it on used Amazon, but the book basically has been, stopped.
Right. Yeah. And what's up with that cult? Is it done or is it still going?
Well, no, what happened is John-Roger in 1988, when he got exposed by the LA Times, he claimed that the John-Roger that died. And that person can't be blamed for all the crap he did. And then he passed it on to a guy named John Morton, the mystical traveler.
Right. And
then John Morton's the head of it. And it's nothing's going on very interesting because nobody's that attracted to it.
Right. So let me ask you, meditation. There's 1,000 different forms. There are lots of people claiming to have the one true meditation, like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi of Transcendental Meditation. David Lynch, who passed away recently, had a whole foundation pushing that. Talk to us about meditation.
Well, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, obviously, we spend most of our time sending our energy external to the world, which is, from an evolutionary perspective, very smart. What our brain does, I always make this argument about consciousness, because people ask me, why would consciousness have evolved if we could just do it by instinct and not be aware of things and things like that? I said, the answer is very simple. Our brain is a virtual simulator, and it's constantly creating simulations or maps in order to navigate wherever we are to survive long enough to pass on our genetic code. Now, the problem is, in this virtual simulation, much of what we simulate, I would argue 90% of it, is crap. But because I have a line, I'd say any meaning is better than no meaning, even if such meaning is nonsense, provided that such meaning makes you live an extra day, which is another way of saying we've almost been evolved to believe in bullshit, provided such bullshit makes me feel like there's some purpose, I can navigate the world.
Right.
Now, in saying that, what meditation's really about is about spending time to be aware of those simulations, like how they play out. And so just the whole thing about mindfulness, the whole thing about stilling the mind, all these things. And really what you're doing is you're simply being an adventurer or a navigator to follow the source of your consciousness and how your brain works. It's basically being a connoisseur of the mind. So there's all, like you mentioned, there's all the sorts of different techniques in order to do the same thing.
Right. So that was my understanding is the brain's purpose. It's a future predictor device.
Yes.
That's more or less what you were describing.
That's it. Exactly right.
But we have all of these unconscious heuristics. I think there's at least 200 cognitive biases that have been identified where we go into these rabbit holes, or sunk cost fallacy or confirmation bias, just to name two off the top of my head, where we can really get trapped into a totalist situation with a person who claims to be an enlightened master.
Yeah, well, Richard Dawkins in 1976 wrote the very famous book called The Selfish Gene. At the very end of the book, he introduced the concept of a meme. Now, a lot of people don't like meme theory, but Susan Blackmore in 1999, I think it was Oxford University Press, wrote the thing called the meme machine. Now, the way to look at this, and I think it's really good, he basically said religion was a virus, that once it gets infection, it infects your brain, it wants to stay there. And Susan Blackmore developed a word called memeplex, in which you have all these ideas, but they don't want to give up. They want to replicate in your head. I was raised as a young child in Catholicism. I got baptized, I got confirmed, I went to Catholic school, I eventually got kicked out of Catholic high school, for which I'm very proud. And what happened is you get infected with these ideas. Even like to this day, every Catholic I know has a sense of guilt. I'm guilty now, even talking to Stephen. I'm just joking. But the point being is that those infections, they place in your mind. And so if you think of a cult and you're an expert in this area, you can just imagine how much difficulty it is to get rid of these ideas because you kind of believe they're true and they're not.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, I believe in memetic warfare. I believe that's what's happening on the internet through social media at this moment, where there are these viruses. In the cult of Trump, I talk about it's a mind virus of authoritarian cults. But each cult is telling their followers a little variation of the story, whether it's a Christian-esque cult that's saying, well, Trump is like King Cyrus. He's evil, but he's doing God's will, so we have to support him. Or the libertarian, atheists who believe in transhumanism and long-termism and all of that crap. But I really do think that that's a very valid concept to think about how intelligent people, as they could catch a COVID virus, can catch a memetic virus that takes over your operating system. And I often will use the computer virus metaphor and say, how you can get deceived to click on a link and then it installs malware and it takes over your operating system.
That's a good one. That's a very good
analogy. When I got in the Moonies, that's what it felt like to me. Like I thought that God is calling me, and I was at a historical moment. World War III was going to happen in 1977 between Russia and the United States. Blah blah blah. And off I went. And the old me was evil and low-spirited and satanic and such.
Well, Stephen, to piggyback on that, I wrote an article many years ago called The Projective Arc. And human beings tend, and this is what I'll give you a story that's really the one thing I'm most proud of. People one time asked me, was it Eckankar exposing this? And I go, no. When I was in India in 1978, I had to meet all these Shabbat yoga gurus, and most of them, come on. But there was one, this is an oxymoron, that was an honest guru. He was 92 years old. His name was Fakir Chand. You could research him on the internet. And he was in, at the time, he was in a thing called Samadhi. They had a white sheet over his head. It was Guru Purnima Day. You know, you have Mother's Day, Father's Day. In India, they have a thing called Guru's Day. It's in July. And he had a white sheet over his head. And I came in, I was the Westerner, and I was wearing a tie-dye shirt. I had, beach outfit.
You're California,
yeah,
dude.
Totally California surfer dude. And I walk into the place, and I think he's dead. I don't have time to research. I came too late. So they were throwing flowers on him and stuff. So I came to pranam him because, as you know, in India, to pay respect, he pulls the white sheet up, sits straight up, looks at me, hits me on the back, and says, "David, so nice to meet you." And everybody's like, "What the fudge is going on here?" And then he explained. It was very interesting. He got pointed to Guru. But he said when he was pointed to Guru, people would start having visions of him, one woman was dying in the river and pulled him out of the river. And Baba Fakir told me, he goes, "I don't know how to swim. How can I pull somebody out of a river?" And then a kid had a test and study, and he got the right answers. And Baba Fakir Chan apparently appeared. And then he looked at me very honestly. He says, "I don't appear to anybody. This is all their own mind. But because they don't recognize it as their own projection, they then give currency to whoever they're projecting on. And therefore they get this idea when this is what happens. You start thinking the guru's got power. This guy's got this, and they don't. Right. They have Wizard of Oz. Toto pulls the curtain. The balloonist from Kansas. This is it. This is the secret to the whole thing. Right. We just tend to project onto these people what they don't have.
That's exactly what I've said a long time ago. Because people would ask me about Moon as my true father, and I believed he was the greatest man in human history, and he had purer love than anyone else, when the guy was a malignant narcissist who couldn't give a shit about me, But I projected all of my goodness and all of my fantasies of what I thought a Messiah would be like until the bubble burst in my deprogramming following my near-fatal van crash, and I realized the guy was a liar, and I heard him lie endless times. He told me to lie to members and to the public, but I didn't have the discrimination. I didn't have the perspective to be able to reality test. I was like in the belief system. I was merged with the belief system.
Well, I'll give you an interesting story that dovetails to what you just said. I was, I'd gone to India, and then I heard about these gurus, Kirpal Singh, Darshan Singh, Ajaib Singh, that had this ability, apparently, to give the experience of light and sound, or an out-of-body experience at the moment of initiation. And I heard this, and I said, you know what? I don't buy it. So I come back. And I'm teaching high school back in the day. This is back in the 80s, at a Catholic high school. Mm-hmm. And I was the University of San Diego High School, and I was teaching a class called Death and Dying, which is kind of a strange class. And they're bored. It's 1:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday at a Catholic school. And I looked at them, I said, "We're going to do something radical." And they go, "What is that?" I said, "I'm going to teach you the Shabbat yoga technique that's supposedly secret, which they're not supposed to reveal. I want to try something." I said, "I'm not sure what's going to happen. So close your eyes, meditate, kind of listen to the inner sound, try to see inner light. And I'll touch you," because this is what the gurus do. They touch you on the forehead, right? Mm-hmm. So I go around the room, and I don't know what's going to happen. Well, after I said, "What happened?" So I looked to the first person. She goes, "I saw a little light." Another person goes, "Oh, I heard a little sound." And then there's one guy in the back goes, "Are you a guru?" I go, "No." He says, "I was closed my eyes. I saw you at the end of a tunnel looking at me." And then I realized what was going on. It was all of their own projection, but the guru takes credit for it. Right. So I did this at UCSD. I did it to graduate students at the another school called I forget the name of it, but CSPP, the California School of Professional Psychology. And what happened was this. I wrote a paper called the Kirpal Statistic. Mm-hmm. And here's the answer. The gurus then said, "Oh, no. Dave had spiritual power, but he's now losing it. He's diluting it." What bullshit. That's this is exactly what you just said. They take credit for what you're doing.
Yeah. And if anything that goes well in your life, it's because of the guru. And anything that doesn't go well, it's because of your bad karma. You weren't meditating more pure enough, or you had bad past life experience, or some other type of story.
Right. That's right. You're absolutely right. And that's exactly how they play. That's what John-Roger did. He came up with a better one. He called it the red monk. Instead of the call power, you have the red monk. Whatever the hell that is.
Right. Well, the key is saying it with certainty and confidence and having a few core devotees who are true believers. And then there's like a contagion effect of mirror neurons where everybody else is like,
that's it. That's it. That's it. And it's also social pressure. You don't want to be the one guy that says, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. You have to start bullshitting. So, another one, probably the one guru that I got in the most trouble with was Sai Baba.
Oh, he stripped over 500 young boys.
Yeah, well, here's what happened was
Hard Rock Cafe and the Blues Cafe. Right. Isaac Tigert was a disciple.
I did we used to have a journal back in the 80s called Understanding Cults and Spiritual Movements, and I did a book review of Jack Hislop. He was the president of the Sai Baba Association in North America, called My Baba and I. And he claimed that he could produce this and Vibhuti and
Rolex watches with registration numbers on the back.
That's it. And so I said something probably somewhat rude. I said, if he's really God, why doesn't he pull a Nissan Sentra out of the ear or the biggest diamond and feed poor people? Well, Hislop then said, I'll get you to Sai Baba. You can meet him, blah, blah, blah. And they didn't. But what did happen was I created a forum on Yahoo, the Sai Baba forum, and people that got abused by Sai Baba came to me. And what happened is I also started to find out how he did his magic tricks.
The Vibhuti trick,
we caught him. There's a South Korean documentary. And I was I think one of the first people, way 5 years before YouTube, I put it on my website, Neural Surfer, and you could see, I figured out how he did the jewels.
Yeah.
He has an envelope underneath him where people give him prayers. Yeah. But nobody thinks, well, what about the bottom envelope where he's got all this crap, or in his couch or wherever he sits with people? So I got death threats every day for a year at Mount San Antonio College. Mm-hmm. And you're going to like this part. UCSD, I had my website at UC San Diego. The webmaster called me up one day and he says, Dave, we got to have to kick you off the web. Kick you off the... And I go, why? He says, well, I think it's the president of India contacted UCSD, and he was a follower of Sai Baba and didn't like And so finally, the findings, David Bailey contacted me, and they published it. And then BBC did a whole thing about the shadow. So he got exposed. And you mentioned probably the biggest pedophile guru we've ever known.
Yeah, so let me just say that I was friends with an Indian named Premanand, who was the founder of the Indian Skeptics.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, I know you're talking about.
Who learned magic tricks and actually wrote little books explaining every frickin' magic trick that Sai Baba was using to trick people into thinking that he was God and could do all of these magic things. And I had many clients over the years who would be like, Steve, Sai Baba is coming into my bedroom and having sex with me at night. And what do? I'd be dealing, as you were saying, people have these projections and these phobic installations that they have powers. So, I'll do things, whatever I think is going to help the person, but say something. So like, do you believe that Sai Baba is listening right now? Oh, yes, he's listening right now. And I'm like, fuck you, Sai Baba. If you're God, smoke me. Like, just lightning bolt me out of existence. Hello, where are you?
Sai Baba's tricks were so bad and so amateurish that if you could imagine if we had David Copperfield in India with a turban, the third eye patch, being, flowing robes, being blown by unseen winds, he would blow people's minds. Yeah. And the other thing about Sai Baba, besides his bad miracles, is that, Tal Brook, that's why I wanted to mention. I don't know if you remember Tal Brook. He was the first one called Lord of the Air. It was published in India by a major publishing house. He was the first one to indicate Sai Baba's sexual
Yeah, I had that book somewhere in my boxes.
Yeah, that was an interesting. I'm surprised he didn't get more traction. But you know why? Because he turned out to be a Christian fundamentalist. Later on, became the president of the Spiritual Counterfeits Project.
Yeah, but millions of Indians believed that Sai Baba was God, and
they still do.
Politicians and military and police. And some still do. I think.
Oh, they do. There's thousands and thousands of people that still do. Maybe millions. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in your research on neuroscience,
yes,
we're touching a little bit on that now. What's your take on the topic of hypnosis and other altered states?
Well, I'll give you one thing that we studied pretty deeply. You've heard of sleep paralysis, right?
Yes.
What we found out when I was doing the meeting, I've been to India 11 times, the gurus would argue in the Shabad yoga tradition, I'll just take that as an example, that they wanted to die to live. They wanted to get their bodies completely numbed up. You start to hear an internal sound, see light, and you would have this conscious near-death experience or an OBE.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't understand because there is this numbing process that occurs. Mm-hmm. But then I realized what was going on. What it was instead of resisting sleep paralysis, you know how you get sleep paralysis? People get scared. Mm-hmm. They tend to want to wake up or they have nightmares or they think. What the yogis or the mystics would do would simply go with the sleep paralysis and not resist it. Mm-hmm. And that causes the feeling, not really, but you're out of the body. Or the feeling that you're out of the body. So it has a biochemical basis. Here's the punchline. Because yogis and gurus and mystics don't really understand neurology, they come up with explanations that are mythology. Uh-huh. And the more you understand the neurological basis of these experiences, not to dismiss it. I mean, it's a cool thing. Like it's nice to get that bliss, to get that feeling, but it's neurological. It doesn't come from outside. Mm. And that's what the problem is, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tap your expertise. There's a 20-year-old who is dabbling with meditation on the journey, wants to know what the meaning of life is. He's looking at YouTube videos. He's hearing about ascended masters or, you know, energy forces from the next dimension. Talk to this person.
Well, I meditate a lot and I like meditation. But the key to the meditation is to realize it's you. You're really exploring your own brain. You're exploring your own consciousness. The problem is how you interpret when you have interesting experiences. Your friend who's 20, again, the projective arc. I also have a word called the Chandrian effect, where you then place it and interpret things in some kind of meaningful, higher, mystical way, which is really unnecessary. Much better to ground it in empirical science. It's still, look, I surf, right? And one of the great things in surfing is to get in the tube. You know, you're in the tube, and surfers will always say, oh my God, it was amazing. It was radiant. You know, I was gnarly. came out of the almond eye or whatever they say. But the fact of the matter is just H2O, and it's just fiberglass, and there's just a human organism inside a cylinder. That's it. Now, that doesn't diminish the experience. It's wonderful. It's great. It's blissful. Same thing with meditation. Meditation is you're exploring, I use the word neural surfer. You're basically exploring your own possession of your own brain. Mm-hmm. The danger for your 20-year-old is that they'll have great experiences. Don't get me wrong. We can have altered experiences in consciousness that are amazing, stunning. Mm-hmm. I spoke in tongues when I was 15, for an example. I didn't make it up. But watch. It was part of my neurology. But given I was 15, fundamentalist Christians wanted to tell me I got the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It's not true. I mean, you can believe that. Right. But if you do that, like you said, you go down that rabbit hole. And you don't need to.
Yeah. I first was exposed to speaking in tongues when I was asked to help people in the Way International, a
Right.
cult of Victor Paul Whewell. It was a right-wing survivalist rifle cult. And they had classes to teach people how to speak in tongues. That they could watch tapes, class 1, 2, or 3. So naturally, if I'm helping people out of the cult, is that the Holy Spirit? I don't think so.
Well,
but I learned how to do it.
Well, no, you raise an interesting issue. When I spoke in tongues at Loyola Marymount, I was 15 years old. I didn't want to speak in tongues. I walked up to the altar and they asked me, what do you want to pray for? And I said, I just want to know. Like I was, agnostic. I just want to know. They put their hands on me. And I had a mystical experience, no doubt about it, but it was I'll explain later how I explained it neurologically.
Please.
But it was an amazing experience. I mean, I didn't make it up. I didn't imitate it. Everybody was blown away. So the next day, the brother, August, made me the head of prayer meetings at Notre Dame High School. So I was like the spiritual guy, right? And you're absolutely right. I started doing these prayer meetings. Priests would come, a bunch of people. And then eventually speaking in tongues became a cool thing. But it wasn't genuine. So they started making it up. A lot of my friends were, they just start doing that. And it was not my experience. My experience was like, it was mind-blowing. It was, like a mystical experience. So I quit. And then I realized I did a whole deep study on speaking in tongues. And I came up with my own theory. And I basically made this argument. It's very simple. I said, if I was in a different setting, like a Kundalini yoga with Swami Muktananda, and they did not ask me to speak out loud. Remember, the key to this whole thing is I was asked to speak out loud when I was like feeling like I was leaving my body. So whatever came out sounded like gibberish. Fair enough? And even to me, it was like, what the fudge is going on here? So you're right?
Right.
And so what happens is if you were in a different context and you were closing your eyes and they said, don't speak, you wouldn't speak in tongues.
Right.
You would have some kind of different mystical experience. Now, I gave an analogy in my class. Everybody thinks I'm nuts. I said, I want you to imagine that a girl or a guy is going to have an orgasm. And at that moment, you put a microphone in front of their face. And what are they going to speak? Like, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's they're going to speak somewhat gibberish because they're in an ecstatic state or speak nasty languages or whatever it may be. So I made the argument. The reason speaking in tongues became popular in the Christian community is that the mystical experience was then shared with everybody else.
Right.
Whereas if you're just meditating, it's a private experience.
Right.
But nobody wants to interpret it. Here we go, Stephen, with the brain. They want to attribute it to, like you said, to the Holy Spirit or to somebody else.
That's fascinating. External attribution, in other
That's
words.
it.
Yeah, and so in these, I don't believe it's the Holy Spirit, but also, if I'm counseling people, I would never say it's not spiritual. I'd offer other interpretations for it. But what would be fascinating is someone would speak in tongues and someone would interpret it. So, Lord Jesus is calling us to surrender.
That's it.
But this happens in lots of different, not just, Catholic, but one of the biggest groups of cults, I call them authoritarian cults in the cult of Trump, is this network called New Apostolic Reformation. Have you heard that term?
No, I like it though.
NAR. I didn't make it up. There's a book by Weaver about it, and people like Frederick Clarkson and Andre Gagne have written about it as well. What makes them different from Christian churches is these are self-appointed apostles and prophets who claim to speak directly to God, and they demonstrate their relationship with God because they can speak in tongues.
Right.
And then they claim they can cast out demons and do faith healings.
Right.
But they run cults, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And they convince people that they have to follow their words, otherwise Satan and demons are going to possess them. So the phobia indoctrination, right? And it's these people that said, God told me that Trump won the 2020 election. So don't believe the demonic fake news media.
Right.
And the pedophilic, Democrats. But we're talking 30 to 40 million Americans are in these.
Wow.
Paula White is Trump's.
That's right. I know.
She does that. And send me $133 for the blessing, the so-called prosperity ministry angle as well. It's not just spiritual. And, but people are leaving. People are realizing this is like not healthy. They're not happy. They're living in fear. They've been given, in a sense, a pseudo identity that where they've isolated from family and friends and what they were doing beforehand.
That's insane. It's insane. I always think of Nietzsche. He says the only way to understand the world is it's a madhouse, paroxysms of madness, and that's what we're seeing. Worse than I've ever seen it. In my whole lifetime, it's the worst I've ever seen it. You can't have a decent conversation.
I concur. Except I'm still an idealist, Dave, and I'm like, there are a lot more good people out there than, malignant narcissists who want to burn the planet down by pushing fossil fuels or, wanting to, sell guns. And it doesn't matter, how many civilians are killed. I think there's a lot more good people. So in my efforts, I'm trying to raise awareness and say, hey, it happened to me. I got radicalized. Like I would have killed on command or died on command. And I was literally in the room with Sun Myung Moon in 1974 when he said that God hates democracy. We need a theocracy to rule the world.
Wow.
We have to infiltrate the government.
Wow.
And when we take power, we're going to amend the Constitution and make a capital offense for people who violate our rules. And I thought that was a great idea as a Moonie. Why? Because I thought he knew God's will and he had this master plan of how to make the Garden of Eden on earth.
Isn't that amazing? Well, I just reread, in fact, we made an audiobook version of the Declaration of Independence. And when you read that very closely, 90% of it is we don't want a king. That's really what it's about. And now what we have is all the makings of somebody who wants to be a king.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have a YouTube channel. When we do the blog, we're going to add the links to this, but you're making audiobooks of all kinds of really important content, books that have gone out of print. You mentioned the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. Well, I got obsessed. I've always loved audiobooks. And in fact, I make the joke that the first audiobook I ever had was my girlfriend. When I was 16, we were going to go surfing. And this book by Lop Sing Rampa, you remember him? And he was some weird, but he wrote a book called The Hermit, real fun fiction, but at the time, nobody thought it was fiction. And I said, read it to me as I drive. That was my first audiobook. And then my brother and I were obsessed by it. So we've, in the last year, have produced 3,000 audiobooks. Any book published before 1929, as you know, is in the public domain. But what we've been doing is I will write a story and then augment it with ChatGPT Pro. So you can produce amazing stories that would never exist without it. So it's fun. So you combine the tools of AI with the tools of the internet.
Yeah. So we're going to do a second interview.
Yes, I understand. I will
do a dive on AI and virtual reality headsets, which honestly I've been too scared to try, but you're like...
I'll bring one up, so you'll have to try it.
Yeah, we're going to see each other shortly up at a conference, brainmind.org, which I'm very excited that we're going to together. But I want to circle back. You mentioned Muktananda.
Yes.
Siddha Yoga, Guru Mai, another sexual guru.
Yes. What happened was with Swami Muktananda, he became popular in the early part of the 1970s because Ram Dass, otherwise Richard Alpert, took him on a tour throughout the United States. And he wrote a book called The Play of Consciousness, which everybody enjoyed because he was talking about all these different states, seeing the blue pearl, leaving his body, hearing inner sounds, all this stuff. He used to run an ashram in Oakland. It had a really good restaurant. I always believe cults have great restaurants when they really believe in the guru.
Yeah.
Just remember that because the food's good. So he had a restaurant.
Suck people in that way.
Yeah, that's like, well, the Qinghai thing will do it. So Omelette, they had a restaurant called Omelette. It had a great burger. Well, it turned out in 1983, the Co-Evolutionary Quarterly, I think her name was Katie Butler, wrote an incredible expose on Swami Muktananda, where he was having sex, apparently tantric sex, with all these women, sometimes underage, apparently. And apparently at Ganesh Puri in South India, he had a tunnel where he could have girls come in and out.
Right.
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi also did the same thing. It was a little clandestine affairs with all these different young girls that thought he was God or whatever. Right. But Muktananda was really bad. It was like, ugh. And so that caused a huge expose. And then, of course, he appointed two successors, a brother and a sister. But the brother and sister didn't get along. So the brother got ousted, he got excommunicated. And the sister, as you mentioned, upper state New York and all that became very famous, kind of city yoga, Kundalini yoga and stuff.
Right. Yeah. And she kidnapped him to force him to give over the
That's
thing.
Right.
And she's still around as far as I know.
Yeah, and very popular among a certain clientele because they kind of like the female guru.
Wealthy, and apparently she likes plastic surgery a lot too, at least from what I hear from former members. Yeah. What are some other gurus?
Well, let's talk. There's a couple I'd like to mention. Another one that's pretty famous is Qinghai.
Yes,
Qinghai Supreme Master is now there's a backstory here. It turns out that Qinghai was initiated by Takar Singh. Who was a guru?
I've done some of those.
Yeah, he was a disciple of Kirpal Singh. This is all relates go back to Ekankar, John-Roger, whatever. And what happened in 1995, she donated about $600,000 to Bill Clinton's re-election campaign. And what happened there is that's illegal. So the FBI, the Congress, the CIA, whatever, being the great researchers that they are, they went onto the internet, probably Alta Vista, and they typed in Qinghai. Well, the only guy that showed up was me because I'd written an article on the Neural Surfer. Right. So I got phone calls all over the place. And my mom called me up one time, and this is during the Clinton-Monica Lewinsky scandal. And she goes, "Now, David, I didn't know you knew the President Clinton." I go, "I don't know who he is. I didn't know President Clinton. I know who he is, but..." She goes, "Well, you're on the front page of the LA Times. They're quoting you about some guru named Qinghai." Well, as you know, Qinghai has the biggest chain of vegan restaurants in the world called Loving Huts. And they're all over the place, all over the world. And this is her way of getting people to eat good food or sometimes decent food. And there's a TV monitor that plays her 24/7. And she's talk about face surgery, she used to claim she was like a Buddhist monk. Now she sells jewelry. She got outfits. She's and she claims to be God. She's completely loony. Yeah. You can't listen to her more than 5 minutes without getting brain dead.
Well, now you're bringing up another point, which is that people's minds want to make sense of things. And when a guru says nonsense, contradictory things, people feel confusion. And to resolve the confusion, they do these mental gymnastics. And it's often like, I'm just not spiritual enough to understand the depth. Maybe later it will, sink in what the real teaching is or something. No. But what I was trying to convey is, if you want to mind control someone, confuse them.
That's very good. You raise a good point there because there's two words that I use a lot called apophenia and patternicity. Our brains evolved. Like I did this yesterday in class. I put a dot here and a dot here and a dot here. And I said, "What do you see?" And they said, "A triangle." I said, "There's no triangle. There's just three dots." And our mind, as you pointed out, fills in. There's another word called ideological work. We try to reconcile, as you mentioned, the discrepancy, because we think it's our duty to figure this crap out. Right. Like reading the book of Revelation, give me a break. And or the contradictions in the four gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's ideological.
Or Q, figuring out what the messages of Q. It's all about that.
I had a guy.
Alternate reality game.
That's right. There's a guy, there's a really nice guy, Elliot Benjamin. He's PhD in mathematics and smart guy, but he's kind of new agey. And he wrote an article about where he thought the license plates on cars were talking to him. Like, he saw this, he saw that. So I wrote a very heavy critique of it using Littlewood's Law of Miracles. I don't know if you ever heard of Littlewood's Law of Miracles.
No.
It's one of the coolest ideas ever. Littlewood was a mathematician in Cambridge, Wrangler winner, very smart, early part of the 20th century. And he studied the theory of large numbers. And then he found out that every million random events, just by probability, one event, just by randomness, should stand out like more or less as a miracle. Now, it turns out Littlewood's not the guy who came up with it, but he did the theory of large numbers. Okay, so here's the punchline. Every 35 days, there's about 1 million random events in your life, and you should expect a miracle or something weird. I used a word called desultory decusation, which means 2 random events form an X. Now, when that happens, you don't think, oh, that's part of random probability. The most improbable thing must probably happen. You think, oh, wow, there's a purpose. There's a meaning.
The universe.
That's exactly right. And going to your point, if that happens in a person's life, that they have this wonderful, amazing experience, then all the crap they can't understand, they then burden themselves trying to figure it out.
Right. Yeah, very true. And as you were talking, I was thinking of Robert Lifton, who wrote Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which was used in my deprogramming. He talked about mystical manipulation as one of the 8 criteria of a brainwashing environment. And what it was is that they would take real-life information, often from informants that were in the person's circle.
Wow.
And they would engineer a spiritual event. And basically it would be a misattribution effect that the leader is omnipotent or has spiritual powers or mystical powers or something.
Yeah.
But because I've worked with so many people over 49 years, I hear these stories. Like, what made you think that you need to spend your life with Frederick Lenz? Remember Zen?
Oh, yeah,
Zen
Rama.
Rama?
Yeah, that's right. I just talked to somebody who was a follower of him just recently.
Jim, my assistant.
That's it. That's exactly who I talked to, yeah. And he was surprised I knew about him, the PhD in English.
Jim told
and all
me.
that.
Jim, I actually helped Jim get out 30 plus years ago. And I'll just share briefly because it's a great story and it really dovetails with what you're explaining. So this guy had been in Sri Chinmoy, another Indian
I
guru.
Remember him. Wrote 1,000 poems and
bad guy.
Yeah.
So this guy, Frederick Lenz, would do a meditation tape and have people listen and meditate to his voice doing this meditation tape. And in it, he would say, and when you're truly ready to meet your teacher, a golden light will appear around them, so you will know. And so guess what? When people meet Frederick Lenz, they often see the golden light. So when I met Jim, I said, so what made you decide you had to spend your life and drop out of college, et cetera, and get into this? He said, the golden light. And I just said, hey, Jim, that phenomenon could be replicated by hypnosis. Like there's this thing called positive hallucination. And he said, no, this was a spiritual experience.
Right.
And I was like, well, just consider the possibility that maybe it wasn't, and that it was the fact that you were listening to the tapes and you were being primed to believe that this was going to happen. And damn, Jim, unlike any of my other clients, he was like, prove it.
Good.
And then I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? But I did something that I usually would never consider doing in a case. I said, okay, Jim, I want you to meditate the way Rama taught you how to meditate. And he closed his eyes, and I waited a couple of minutes. And I said, I want you to go deeper than you. And I didn't use a hypnotic voice. I didn't use the velvet voice of hypnosis. I just said, I want you to go deeper than you've ever gone before. Waited another couple of minutes. And then I said, and I don't want you to open your eyes until you're fully ready to see an even brighter light coming from me. So I did in the biz, the hypnosis biz, what's called a double bind. So Jim would have to keep his eyes closed for the rest of his life, or open his eyes and hallucinate
Oh,
brighter. So he opens his eyes and goes, whoa, that's brighter than Rama. That's it. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm done.
And that's why you should become a guru, because you start making money playing that thing. But that's exactly what the gurus in India do.
Yeah.
Because they take your neurology and then take credit for it. You know, John-Roger, going back to him, just to give you an example, he tape recorded every room in his house. And so he would listen in.
Rajneesh did that too.
That's it.
Rajneesh
and so he would get information. And then also he would he tried to butter me up one time. I was sitting talking to him and whatever. And he offered me money to expose that and all that stuff. But I didn't take it. But he said, I just went out of my body, Dave. And I went around you. And I've got, you know. So all of a sudden he's talking. It's like astrology. If they butter you up, or if it's about you're sucker punched, you're in. Because we're all, you know.
Yeah, I've recently talked with people in the Kabbalah Center, you know, the one the Madonna's in.
Yes, right.
And they have a thing where they teach the core recruiters to do astrological charts and read past lives. And guess what? Well, your brother died or your father died to bring you to the Kabbalah Center.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what your soul needs. It needs to be corrected, you know? And let me read your palm. Let me read your face. And it's like...
Well, that's, you know, Stephen, that's huge. I'll give you a fun story. The most popular article I've ever written in my life was for Fate magazine, when I was selling my soul going to graduate school. In 1978, I was invited to go to the world's oldest astrological record called the Brighu Samhita. Apparently written 4,000 years ago by the sage Brighu, written in Sanskrit leaves that when you show up, it says your name, what you did. Oh, it's amazing. It's very famous.
India?
Where is India? Yeah, it's in India. You can search it. It's huge. And so what happened is...
Not the Akashic records.
Well, no. They claim it's a physical manifestation of the Akashic records.
Okay.
Not too many people know where it is. And when I went with Swami Yogeshwar Ananda Saraswati, who was a Christian monk, and Professor Bhagat Ram Kamal. When I went, and I didn't expect to go because I was going to take the bus to Amritsar, but the bus got delayed. They found this leaf after 20 or 30 minutes, and it said David Christopher Lane has come from an island off the sea, and it's very impressive. Don't get me wrong. And they said I could keep the leaf. So I gave the leaf to Swami. I took the bus. I didn't want to lose it. And then he died. So I never had the leaf to test it to find out, you know, whatever. But the punchline is this. That article went everywhere. And it was in the Encyclopedia of Occultism or Parapsychology. I get letters almost every week, 40 years later. Where's the Brighu Samhita? I want to find my name. And I keep telling them it's an economic scam, you know, to get some money.
Yeah.
It's not genuine.
Yeah.
But people still do believe it's genuine. Now, I wanted to do another guru. What about Adi Da?
Franklin Jones.
Yes. Jamaica, New York.
Yeah, the guy who was donated Fijian islands for him to have.
It was Raymond Burr's island, you know, from Ironside and from. It was his island. Yeah,
and didn't he have like an ex-Playboy?
Yes,
playmate or something?
I'll give you a backstory on this one. In 1973, he had a bookstore on Melrose Avenue. Mm-hmm. I was 16 or something. Whatever age I was. I went to the bookstore to catch books. And in order to meet then Franklin Jones, you had to pay $50, which back then was a lot of money.
Yep.
And I knew something was off about this guy. I just knew he was a narcissist or whatever. So in 1993, I think, we wrote a book with Scott Lowe, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. He was a follower of Adi Da or Da Frijan or Baba Frijan. And it was really well written. And we did it. We called Da, The Strange Case of Franklin Jones. And I wrote an article called The Paradox of Da Frijan. It turned out, as you point out, he was having sex with hundreds of women.
Yep.
And then he got married. He has 13 wives or 14 wives, moved to Fiji. Mm-hmm. He's a smart guy. You have people like Ken Wilber.
I was going to say, integral Ken Wilber.
Yeah, he was like bowing down to him. And I knew Ken. Ken and I were friends. And I used to give him shit. I go, how can you... This guy he writes interesting stuff, but he's a complete scam artist. he's just.
I said Ken to Ken in person in Colorado years ago.
Yeah.
How could you support this guy?
Yeah,
He's an enlightened master. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, but he's a very, and so what happens with Adida or Duff-Free, John, is my argument was very simple. He might write well, but that doesn't mean he's the embodiment of his. It's like Alan Watts, he's an alcoholic, but he writes fun stuff. And so I called it mixing the message and the medium. And that's what Wilbur did. Wilbur read Duff-Free, John's Paradox of Instruction or the Dawn Horse Testament, and he thought, oh my God, he writes so well, he must be enlightened. Yeah. Well, that's complete bullshit.
Right.
Anybody can write anything.
Yeah, and Bhagwan Rajneesh wrote a lot of books too that impressed a lot of intellectuals. And he was a hypnotist, and he was a really bad actor.
Oh, he was spooky. And you can't even look at the guy because he's there. It's kind of like zoned out eyes. And Adida speaks gibberish, and people, like you said, have to interpret it.
Right.
And he went to Columbia, got his bachelor's, then he got a master's at Stanford. And he was also a member of Scientology for a year. They put that out of his biography. And
Adida was in Scientology?
Yeah, for a year. He was a member of Scientology. See, there's little
he
factoids.
Learned hypnosis.
That's it. And I have a feeling that's where he figured out how he can make money, not working, not getting a job, And he was a follower of Swami Muktananda, and he wanted Muktananda to appoint him as a successor. Right. So Muktananda wrote some letter, and they've interpreted it this way, that way, whatever. But he died of a heart attack unexpectedly, so.
I could talk to you for hours, but we're going to need to wrap up this one. We're going to do another one, and we may need to do a third one because I just think there's a lot of people who've been in these different yoga guru cults that we really need to know your stories, your understandings, and unpack it because so many people exit and they never process. They don't make sense of it, so they put it in a shelf and they close the door. But that's just makes them more vulnerable to some future guru or some future.
Well, and the sad thing is, here's the sad thing, is that the meditation thing, it works. Meditation's a good thing if you don't misinterpret what happens. Those are good things. Stilling the mind or doing yoga is a good thing. All that stuff's good. I mean, it's just that people layer it, as you point out, with all sorts of crap that leads them down the wrong road.
Right. So may I ask, do you do a breath meditation, a mantra?
Me? No. Mine's really simple. Yeah. What I do is although I have sciatica right now in my right leg, so it's really hard to sit, And so I sit down and try to calm my mind as much as I can. And then what happens is, here it goes. What happens in your neurology, as you know, and John Lilly pointed this out when he did those deprivation tanks in the 50s studying dolphins. What happened was they didn't know what the brain would do deprived of incoming stimulus. When you deprive the brain of incoming stimulus, what does it do? It fantastically hallucinates all sorts of amazing things. Right. Lilly got caught. He started believing that he was seeing aliens because he was taking ketamine and LSD. But what then happens is really interesting, is that your mind, if you just sit really still, my analogy is a train station. And thoughts are like different trains. They go this way, that way, this way, that way. If you can just watch the trains, watch your thoughts, then you start to understand that if you could follow where the thoughts come from, you don't need to get trapped into this thought, that thought, this thought. And ironically, your body gets energized because instead of projecting onto these envelopes of information, you're sitting still. Now, when you do that, some interesting things happen. Very fun. You start to have these interesting, like between sleep and awakeness, you start to see things. Yeah. You'll literally see things, literally. Freaky. Like you'll see an orange and like, fudge, that's really an orange. But it's not. You're just having this lucid, conscious dreaming that people enjoy. And then you'll hear sounds, mystical sounds, which are kind of neat. Because the more you listen to it, your body will go numb. Like I mentioned, sleep paralysis. Right. But here's the thing. I get in a lot of trouble. People don't like me. Because in India, I got invited to at the Dialogue Educational Institute to be the plenary speaker on my interpretation of the neurobiological basis of meditation. Yep. And the guru, who's a PhD from Waterloo, pretty famous guy, he would never comment on anybody else, but he always comments on me because he doesn't like my skepticism. Because I basically said, it's very simple. The mystic must be a skeptic. And if you're not, you get trapped. So I believe it's great to follow consciousness, the neurology, but don't interpret it in ways that are not
don't
necessary.
project to individuals that they're more than you, better than
That's
you.
it. They're not.
And all
as,
of that.
as Nietzsche said, human, all too human. Everybody's just a human being.
Yeah, and with that profundity, we're going to say thank you for being you. What a great
Thanks,
journey you've been on.
It's good to connect with you. It's been a while since I've seen you.
Totally, and more stories coming. To keep listening in, my listeners, and David Christopher Lane, and we're going to do part 2, more on artificial intelligence, virtual reality, more stories I predict will come up with our interesting journeys mutually. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. Steve Hassan here. You know, it's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind. Only you should control it.